Have you ever looked around a crowded room and felt like everyone else received a handbook on how to be human that you somehow missed? It's a persistent, quiet hum in the back of your mind, the feeling that you are fundamentally different, an observer watching a game where you don't quite know the rules. You might have spent your entire life trying to blend in, wearing a mask of normalcy, yet the nagging suspicion remains. You aren't like the others. This isn't just a passing phase or teenage angst. For many, it's a core psychological framework. Today, we're exploring the deep-seated traits of those who have never felt normal, beginning with the first three signs that your brain might be wired on a different frequency. The first trait is chronic observation. People who never feel normal often describe a glass wall between themselves and the rest of the world. While others are swept up in the flow of a conversation or the energy of a party, you find yourself mentally stepping back. You're analyzing the dynamics, noticing the patterns of speech, and wondering how everyone else seems to move so effortlessly. This isn't necessarily social anxiety, it's a detached curiosity. You aren't just living your life, you're studying it, almost as if you're a researcher documenting a foreign culture. This trait often leads to a rich inner world, but it can make the physical world feel distant and exhausting because you are always on, processing data that others simply ignore. The second trait is the manual social interface. For most people, social interaction is like breathing. It's an unconscious process. But for you, it might feel more like operating heavy machinery with a complex manual. This trait involves a hyperfixation on social mechanics. You don't just talk, you calculate. You monitor your eye contact, you consciously decide when it's your turn to speak, and you rehearse your responses in real time to ensure they land correctly. This constant manual processing is a hallmark of someone who feels they lack the innate social software others take for granted. Because you feel like an outsider, you've become a master of mimicry, learning to perform normalcy so well that no one realizes how much mental energy it takes just to stay in the room. The third trait is the chameleon identity. Because you've never felt a natural fit in any one group, you may have developed a fragmented sense of self. You find yourself shifting your personality, your interests, or even your tone of voice depending on who you're with. While everyone does this to some extent, for the person who feels inherently abnormal, this goes deeper. It's a survival mechanism. You've spent so long trying to find a place where you belong that you've become an expert at reflecting whatever environment you're in. The downside is that when you're finally alone, you might feel a profound sense of emptiness, wondering who the real you is when there's no one left to mirror. This search for an authentic self is a lifelong journey for those who have always felt like a square peg in a round hole. This search for an authentic self often leads to the third trait, a state of chronic hypervigilance. When you grow up feeling like you don't naturally fit the mold, you stop relying on instinct and start relying on observation. You become a student of human behavior, not because you want to, but because you have to. You're constantly scanning the room, picking up on micro-expressions, shifts in tone, and subtle body language that others completely overlook. You've learned to manualize social interaction, treating every conversation like a complex puzzle that needs to be solved in real time. While this makes you incredibly perceptive, it is also deeply exhausting. You aren't just hanging out. You are performing a high-wire act of social calibration, trying to ensure your reactions align with what is expected, so that no one notices the disconnect you feel inside. This leads directly into the fourth trait, which many describe as the glass wall syndrome. It is the persistent sensation of being among but not of. You can be in the middle of a crowded room, surrounded by friends or family, and yet feel a profound sense of isolation. It's as if there is an invisible barrier separating you from the rest of humanity. You see people connecting, laughing, and sharing an unspoken shorthand that seems to come to them as naturally as breathing. Yet you feel like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. You can mimic the customs and speak the language, but you never truly feel like a citizen of the group. This isn't necessarily about being lonely, it's about a fundamental lack of resonance. You are on a different frequency, and while you can hear the music everyone else is dancing to, you can't quite feel the beat. The fifth trait is an intense, often overwhelming internal monologue that never seems to shut off. For those who never felt normal, the mind isn't just a tool for processing information. It's a sanctuary and a prison. You likely overanalyze every interaction, dissecting what was said and what was left unsaid long after the moment has passed. This isn't just simple overthinking. It's a search for meaning in a world that feels nonsensical. You might find yourself bored by small talk or the mundane details of daily life, craving instead deep, complex, and high-stakes topics. Because you don't feel grounded in the normal world, your mind retreats into abstract concepts, philosophy, or creative fantasies, where the rules actually make sense. You aren't just living life, you are constantly narrating it, questioning it, and trying to find a logic that justifies your place within it. This leads directly into the sixth trait, the chameleon effect. When you don't naturally fit the mold, you learn to manufacture one. You become a master of social mimicry, observing the way people laugh, the way they hold their coffee, and the specific slang they use, then reflecting it back to them. You aren't being intentionally deceptive. You are practicing a survival mechanism. This social camouflaging allows you to pass as normal in professional or social settings, but it comes at a high psychological cost. By the time you get home, you feel an immense sense of burnout, as if you've been performing a lead role in a play for 8 hours straight without an intermission. The seventh trait is a profound, almost radical empathy for the underdog. Because you know what it feels like to be on the periphery, you are often the first person to notice the person sitting alone at a party or the colleague who is being talked over in a meeting. Your loyalty doesn't go to the popular or the powerful. It goes to the misunderstood, the eccentric, and the marginalized. This empathy often extends beyond humans. Many who feel they don't fit in develop intense bonds with animals or even inanimate objects and nature. You find a sense of kinship in things that don't demand a social performance, finding more humanity in a stray cat or a quiet forest than in a crowded room of people following a social script. Eighth on our list is a hypersensitivity to authenticity. You have developed a fake detector that is incredibly sharp because you've spent so much of your life analyzing human behavior just to understand it. You can see through social posturing and performative kindness almost instantly. You are repelled by small talk, not because you're a snob, but because it feels like a barrier to the truth. You crave raw, unfiltered connection. You would much rather talk about someone's deepest fears or their wildest, most abnormal dreams than discuss the weather or the latest trending news. To you, honesty is the only thing that makes the exhaustion of social interaction worth the effort. This constant search for depth often manifests as an intellectual restlessness. You aren't satisfied with, "That's just the way it is." You want to know why the rule exists, who created it, and if it's actually logical. This can make you a bit of a disruptor in traditional environments. While others are happy to follow the established path, you are busy looking for the cracks in the pavement, wondering if there's a more interesting route through the woods. You don't just want to exist in the world, you want to take it apart and see how the gears turn, even if that means realizing you don't quite fit into the machinery yourself. This heightened awareness often leads to the eighth trait, an almost supernatural level of empathy. Because you have spent so much time on the outside looking in, you've become an expert at reading the room. You pick up on the subtle shifts in someone's tone or the flicker of sadness in their eyes that everyone else misses. You feel the weight of other people's emotions as if they were your own. While this makes you a deeply compassionate friend, it also means you are prone to emotional burnout. You aren't just living your own life. You are inadvertently processing the unspoken vibrations of everyone around you, which is exactly why you often need to retreat into total silence to find yourself again. That need for silence brings us to the ninth trait, an inherent rejection of the superficial. If you've never felt normal, you likely find small talk to be an agonizing chore. You don't care about the weather or the latest celebrity gossip. You want to talk about why we're here, what happens when we die, and what it feels like to be truly alive. You seek depth in a world that often seems content to skate across the surface. This can make you seem intense or intimidating to others, but it's actually a search for authenticity. You aren't being difficult. You are simply refusing to participate in social rituals that feel like a waste of the limited time you have. Finally, the 10th trait is the most transformative: the ability to forge a custom-built identity. Most people accept the roles handed to them by their parents, their culture, or their careers. But because you never fit into those prefabricated molds, you were forced to create your own. You have hand-selected your values, your interests, and your way of being. This journey is often lonely and filled with self-doubt, but it results in a version of self that is far more resilient and authentic than anything found in a textbook. You didn't just stumble into who you are, you designed yourself. If you recognize these traits in your own life, understand that not feeling normal isn't a diagnosis of a flaw. It's a badge of individuality. The world doesn't need more people who blend perfectly into the background. It needs the outliers, the observers, and the people who aren't afraid to question the machinery. You might have spent years trying to fix what you thought was broken, but perhaps it's time to realize that your perspective is your greatest strength. You were never meant to be normal because you were meant to be yourself. If this resonated with you, leave a comment about which trait hit home the most. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to finally feel a little less alone. Thank you for watching.